Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shelf Life, a podcast where we discuss books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with a book. And we are back with a second episode! Yay! I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who listened to and loved the first episode. The response has been absolutely wonderful. I really was not expecting it. Everyone who personally messaged me, even, and said that they enjoyed the concept of the podcast, a huge thank you to you as well. This kind of positive, constructive feedback really pushes me to keep going and produce more content for you and read more for you. And now, before we enter the world of our second book together, I want to give you just a glimpse, just a wholesome moment, a complete idea. Just these two lines from Saeed Tabrizi's couplet that managed to define an entire novel. One could not count the moons that shimmer on her roofs, or the thousand splendid suns that hide behind her walls. A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khalid Hosseini. It is a book which, when published, opened to immensely favorable reviews and is still considered one of the greatest books ever written. It is especially famous with the younger lot, is what I've noticed. I have found that even people who don't read a lot or haven't read a lot find a lot of inspiration in this book and find that they can relate to this book a lot. And it's a great starting out book as well, I believe. And now, before we get into the book and its characters and the plot and narrative, I want to tell you a little bit about how I met the book and my strongest memory of it. And then I want to tell you a little story, a personal story. And this is something that we would be doing with every book that we discuss on this podcast. I will be talking about how I met a book and my strongest memory of it, and then I might tell you a little story about myself. So, how I met the book is through a gift. It was given as a gift to me on my 17th birthday, if I'm not wrong, or my 16th. I'm not too sure about that. And it was given to me by a close friend of mine, Ensita, who actually inspired me to read a lot back when we were in school. She was someone, and she still is someone, who could finish 30 books over the course of one summer. So she was the one who gave me this book. And at the time, I didn't really know a lot about Khalid Hosseini. I hadn't read Kite Runner. I hadn't even watched the movie. So it was completely new to me. And I was completely open to the idea of reading about a place other than India or the West. I wanted to read about Afghanistan, and this seemed like a good book to start with. And coming to my earliest memory of this book, my strongest memory of this book, if I had to just sum it up in one word, it would be reading on a train, on a local train in Mumbai, during rush hour, early in the morning, say around 9 o'clock, 9:30. And that feeling of having, 1,000 other women around, next to you, sitting around you, standing around you, and going on with their lives, and knowing that you too are going towards something. But this journey and this commute of maybe an hour or half an hour, however longer you commute, that commute takes you to another world. And through this book, you immerse yourself in a world completely different than yours, while still holding on to some pieces of your reality. And that feeling is something that I still remember and I still carry with me. And as I recite this podcast, that is the feeling that keeps coming back to me. That feeling of being on a train, going towards something, and at the same time being transported to a different world. So that is my strongest memory of this book, and it is a memory that I carry with me. And I think every book that you read has a memory attached to it and has some sort of idea that you keep going back to. And I think if you look closely enough, you will find um, some part of yourself that you reveal in those memories. So something to introspect about. And I'm going to leave you with that. Um, and now I want to tell you a little story. I want to tell you something that my mother told me when I was young. Correction, younger. I want to tell you something that she told me very plainly one afternoon, and it is something that I have that carried with me deep inside me for a long time, and it's something that stayed with me. And when it was told to me, I didn't truly grasp the gravity of it, but now I truly do. And it was that the most important thing, and I mean the most important thing that I was ever going to have in my life was going to be my youth. Now, that's a thought that I didn't truly understand when I was younger, but I think with time, as I grow older, as I venture more out into the world, it is something that keeps coming back to me, something that I think about a lot. And it's something that I want you to think about as well. What is youth and what is its importance in our life? How does youth play out in your life, the reality of your youth? If you are in your youth or if you're not, if you've passed it, I don't know. But I want you to think about this, that our youth is probably what maybe does not define us, but it shapes us. It builds how we look at the world. It shapes how we see things and meet people and meet even ourselves. And this I would like to connect directly with what I thought was the most important element of A Thousand Splendid Suns, which was for the characters, there was either a complete absence of youth or a complete loss of youth. Now, if you're someone who doesn't know much about A Thousand Splendid Suns, let me give you a little bit of background. A Thousand Splendid Suns opens somewhere in the 1960s in Afghanistan. It's a story about two women, one older and one much younger. Mariam is the older one. She is an illegitimate child who has endured a lot in life. She goes through a lot of trauma, and you almost feel that she is destined to only suffer. She's married off when she's 15. Her mother commits suicide. There's a lot of sadness in her life, and somehow she finds comfort in Leila, who is a girl who grew up around the block, and she was comparatively well off. She had a good family, but she tragically loses her family, and she's again thrown into a lot of trauma and undergoes a lot of pain. But in the end, you come out. It's a story of survival and how, even in the toughest of situations and the most grim situations, there is still hope and there is still love that can bloom. And it is a story of that. And if you've read the book, you would know that for Mariam, I felt very strongly a lack of youth, and for Leila, a loss of youth. Now, these two are concepts completely different. Mariam was a girl who never had a youth. She grew up on the outskirts. She had always been ostracized. She yearned for a life that Leila had had. And it was something that she was never given. It was something that she never imagined herself to have. But for Leila, the pain I feel is even stronger because she had a youth. She had the prospect of a youth. She had her friends. She had loving parents. She went to school. Maryam didn't even go to school. She didn't have a formal education. But Leila uh, had gone to school and wanted to go to school. She was encouraged to go to school. She had friends who were normal, who were like her own age. She had dreams, you know? And because of a lot of political turmoil, of course, that Afghanistan goes throughout the years that the book covers, you see that Leila loses all that is hers, and the entire world that she knows comes crumbling down, literally. And the book is about a loss of youth as well as lack of youth, and how these two situations go almost side by side in a country like Afghanistan, or in any country which is mired by tragedy or war or in strife. So, this is something that I found extremely important and something that really, really stayed with me. How do you connect to something that is so foreign and seems so different? But to be honest, when I was reading this book, like I said, I was only 17. I was on the brink of my youth. I was going to college. I was just started going to college. I was commuting every day. I was trying to be independent. And this, when I was reading this book, it felt so different. It almost humbled me. This idea that in a world not very far from mine, someone could be living a completely different life. Someone is living a completely different life. And yet, you are here, living the life that perhaps could be taken away just as easily. And this is the beauty of reading. This is the beauty of immersing yourself in books and alternate realities and movies and art. We find similar grounds even in completely foreign destinations. We find similarities in characters that have absolutely nothing to do with us. And that is something that A Thousand Splendid Suns does phenomenally well. Um, Now let's get back to a little more technical part of the podcast. I want to get into one part of the book where I felt that the book fell a little short for me. Otherwise, it's absolutely brilliant. Like I said, the characters are well written. The story is almost perfect. You will be moved to tears, I feel, if you read the book. But somewhere it falls short. And for me, that somewhere was the writing. Now, the writing, it's not as though it's not good. It's simple. But the problem is that it's almost too simple. It's a little too easy. And for content that is so heavy and so moving and tragic, you need writing that is more powerful. And I would like to add here that if you like stories like A Thousand Splendid Suns, and if you want to read more about, you know, stories in conflict, war-torn countries, you could check out a book that has beautiful writing. It's a book called Home Fire by Kamila Shamsi. She is a Pakistani origin writer, and the Home Fire was also longlisted, if I'm not wrong, for the Man Booker Prize. I'm not sure if it was shortlisted, but it is absolutely brilliant. And I definitely think you should check that book out if you liked A Thousand Splendid Suns, or if this is your genre, you like to read more books like these. You know, books with a lot of tragic characters, a lot of touching stories. I definitely think you should check that out. And that is a book that had absolutely wonderful writing. It was so powerful and so poetic and just written with so much tenderness. And that tenderness and patience is something that I felt was a little lacking in Khalid Hosseini's writing. But not to complain, of course, it's still beautiful and absolutely perfect. Moving on, another thing that I think we can discuss, and this is something that I found very, very interesting, particularly, was this idea and this concept, this theory actually, that kept coming back throughout the novel, and even after you read the novel, it stays with you, which is the theory of marriage, the connection that marriage has, and the importance that marriage is given throughout the book. You realize, and I want you to think about this as well and get back to me if you can. Uh, don't you feel that all the characters in the novel could have had very, very different lives if they'd just married differently? This is something that you should think about. And the kind of importance, the kind of gravity that marriage has in this novel, especially considering the fact that Mariam and Layla were married to the same man. He was an abusive man, and Layla couldn't marry her lover. All of these things, all of these elements, they really are the driving forces of the story. And you think about it, it was the element that caused a lot of pain for all the characters and led to a lot of tragedy for characters, and it also drove the narrative forward. But in an alternate universe, if marriage could have been done differently, if, say, Mariam hadn't married Rashid, if Layla hadn't married Rashid, if Layla had just married Tariq, um, let's go back even further. If Mariam's mother, Nana, had married Jalil and Mariam hadn't been an illegitimate child, what then? This is something that I really got into thinking, and I realized that it all starts with our mothers, doesn't it? And even in the book, it started with not Mariam, but Mariam's mother. If Nana had married Jalil, if Nana hadn't been just a worker who worked in Jalil's house and who hadn't married him and, had his kids, if she had just been that woman, Mariam could have had a completely different life. A life where perhaps she would have never even met Layla. And Layla, if Layla had just married Tariq, had gone away with Tariq, she would have never met Mariam and had children that she had and with Rashid, and the story would have never been. And it's so important to think of that because it is real. In countries like Afghanistan, in countries like India, where marriage is not just a social contract between lovers, not just a contract between two people who want to spend their lives together. It is more than that. It is a contract between families. It is a contract between statuses, and a lot of social obligations are involved. In countries like these, in systems like these, what role does marriage play? And how vastly does it impact the individual? What is left of the individual when you are married? And that is something that we see in the book, that the individual is something that is continuously told to recede in the background once he or she is married. And this goes even for the men, even for Rashid's character. And Ensita, in fact, if I have to bring her back, pointed this out very, very correctly when I spoke to her a while ago. She said that Khaled Hosseini does something perfectly, which is that he makes you sympathize for even Rashid's character, who is antagonistic in the book, and he makes you sympathize and empathize with that character, not because of his personality, but because of the society that he lives in, the system that he's been raised with. You understand the oppression that even he has suffered and continues to suffer, and you see it, and it is provided to you with a completely non judgmental look. And that is something that is very tough to do in a book that is primarily about the oppression of women. How do you show men who are not uh, complete villains, who are also victims of the same kind of system that persists and keeps persisting? And this is a very interesting point that I came across, and I really, really appreciated this input. So, connecting it back to marriage, I think you should think about this and tell me your thoughts. Do you think things could have happened differently if all the characters had not married? If they had married differently and had not married at all? Tell me what you think. And coming back to the one of the last parts of the podcast, I want to talk about the last element of the book, and specifically the most lasting element of the book, which is the fact that the memory of love and the memory of hope is what leads to survival. And this is a beautiful thought that I think keeps coming back in all of Khaled Hosseini's novels and in everything that he writes. It is the memory of love and the memory of hope that leads Mariam to do what she does in the end. And it leads the characters to behave in unprecedented ways, in heroic ways, and save the people that they love. And what Mariam does for her family, for Leila, for Leila's children, is solely out of the memory of love and the memory of hope and the possibility of a better world. And this is something that is so true for all of us, for all of our lives. Everything we do stems from love. Everything we do, no matter how random, comes from a place of love or a place of yearning for love and yearning for hope. Even in The God of Small Things, if I have to go back to the first episode, it is the memory of what was and the world that was that brings Esta and Rahel back to Yemenem and back to the world of their mother and the river and the history house, even when it brings along with it so much pain. And it's not to say that the memory of love does not involve pain and tragedy. It is not to say that love does not bring with it its own set of problems and constraints and restraints. But there's still hope to be found. There's still so much to gain. And this is what builds these characters. This is what makes the characters who they are. So that, I think, is an extremely human quality, and it's the most human quality to love. And it's something that is brought out so beautifully in the book, and that it will bring you to tears if you read it. It will be something that will stay with you and that you will take back into your lives. I did, for sure, and I think it has made me a better person from when I started the book. I think now I am a person who carries with me the memory of love, and I do a lot keeping that in mind, and even keeping in mind what my mother had said about youth being the time to just be whoever you want to be, however you want to be. And I think this is something that we all can look back on and think about. What is it that your mother maybe has told you about life and love? What have you learned through books? And what do you keep learning through life? Lastly, I would like to get back to the question that we on this podcast keep coming back to, which is a question that will be answered by you and by me. It is, why do you think the story was told? Now, to be honest, I think this story was told because not enough stories like this are told. I think the story was told because we deserve to hear voices from Afghanistan, from every war torn country, from every country in strife. Uh, we deserve to hear voices that are oppressed and have been oppressed for a very long time, and have been systematically submerged by larger forces. I think the story needs to be told because it is a story that is written by women in their own minds and bodies. If I was to quote Amrita Pritam, there are stories written in the minds and bodies of women that never meet ink and paper. And it's something that holds so true. And I think this is why stories like A Thousand Splendid Suns and The Kite Runner and writers like Khalid Hosseini, Kamila Shamsi, these are writers that we need to nurture and protect, and they need to write because we need these stories. We need to hear them and to know that they are heard and loved and cherished is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. We will be back next week with a brand new episode, and our book that we will be talking about is going to be in honor of Pride Month. Pride Month, if you do not know, is the month of June. It is celebrated as Pride Month all across the world because it celebrates members of the LGBT community, the LGBT community as a whole, and also its allies. And so we will be discussing a very obscure but very, very beautiful LGBT novel. It is a regional Indian novel written in Marathi. It is a novel called Cobalt Blue by Sachin Kundalkar. If you want to check it out before we do the podcast, you can definitely do so. If you've already read it and you have some anecdotes to share, please feel free to do so. You can always email me. My email is in the description box. You can always message me as well. I will be available. I will always be available for a good chat about books. And if there's anything else you would like me to know, please feel free to send in your comments and your feedback. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next time.